enigmas. She had cherished the dream of an Alaskan cruise for years. So, when she and her sister finally booked it, in mid-July 2017, it felt like a well-deserved reward for enduring the grueling, sweltering summer heat back home. The ship carried over 3,000 passengers. Yet, by the second night, the vessel had transformed into a familiar, vibrant neighborhood on the waves. They mastered the quickest route from the buffet to their interior cabin on the 8th deck, adjusted to the theater show schedule, and even found a favorite bartender whose cocktails added a special charm to their evenings. Everything around them radiated tranquility, clear order, and reliable protection. On the third night, July 25th, they watched the sunset gently blush over the glaciers and then headed to a family entertainment show in one of the cozy lounges. The host cheerfully joked, calling everyone present detectives solving fictional mysteries, while the real ship glided through the wild, pristine nature. Time twos. No one suspected that just a few decks below, a genuine tragedy was brewing, ready to erupt. Around 9 p.m., they left the hall early. Her sister had suddenly succumbed to seasickness. The corridor near their cabin seemed unusually silent. The roar of the engines drowned out even casual conversations. From the adjacent cabin E734, just 2 doors away, an argument between a man and a woman echoed. The man's voice was deep and menacing, while the woman responded with noticeable confusion, as if trying to conceal a discord that had already surfaced. She considered intervening by knocking on the door, but as an outsider in someone else's family affairs, she decided such altercations usually subsided on their own. Instead, she took her sister into the room and turned the TV up loud. Moments later, a powerful jolt shook the wall, followed by a piercing, desperate scream that cut off mid-word. Her sister's eyes widened in fear. Before she could recover, the ship's alert system crackled to life. Security, medical team, cabin E734. The calmness in the announcement sharply contrasted with the chilling horror that gripped her insides. She cracked open the door. Through the gap, she could see curious faces of other passengers peering out from their rooms and whispering. Then, a steward rushed past in protective gloves, decisively knocking on E734. Ship security, open up. Silence. He used a master key, flung the door open, and immediately requested backup. The next half-minute stretched into a tense, oppressive pause, and then a cry filled the corridor. Blood! It was followed by the sounds of retching vomit. Security officers arrived with a medical cart, cordoned off the passage, and ordered everyone back to their cabins. Through the peephole, she saw them lead a barefoot man into the corridor, wearing jeans and a gray t-shirt soaked in blood to the point of blackness. His hands were covered in crimson from his forearms to his elbows. He monotonously mumbled, "She wouldn't stop laughing at me," in such an even tone as if describing the malfunction of a simple appliance. When one of the guards reached for handcuffs, the man lunged toward the open balcony door as if intending to dump the load overboard. He was tackled to the floor, and his wrists were secured with plastic zip ties. The rest of the night passed in forced confinement. Crew members went door to door, collecting testimonies. One officer informed them of a grave incident, and that a female passenger showed no signs of life. Names were kept secret, but gossip spread in whispers through the ventilation systems. The couple was from Utah. They were celebrating an anniversary. Their children were waiting in the adjoining cabin. Muffled sobs could be heard through the thin bulkheads. After all, you go on a cruise to escape the routine of everyday life, not to encounter murder at arm's length. At dawn, the captain announced that the ship was changing course to Juneau to disembark the FBI. When the corridor finally reopened, cabin E734 was cordoned off with crime scene tape. A dark red stain had seeped into the beige carpet, despite the cleaner's futile efforts to wash it away. Passengers stared, took photos with their phones, and hurried away, like gawkers at a fresh disaster, masking their curiosity with haste for breakfast. For the remainder of the voyage, she mentally replayed those sounds, the dull thud, the cut-off scream, that ominous phrase, "She wouldn't stop laughing at me." The children's cabin was now guarded, and every time she saw the two teenage girls under escort shuffling to lunch, she felt a pang in her chest. It struck her how there was no escape from misfortune on a ship. You share walls, air, and lifeboats with anyone, angels or devils who boarded. Back home, she was glued to the news. The man was Kenneth Manzanares, 43 years old. The victim was his wife, Christy, 39 years old. According to investigators, he had punched her relentlessly, fracturing her skull, while their daughters pounded on the locked door. Relatives pulled him away, but he kept trying to drag the body to the balcony until the crew restrained him. An autopsy determined the cause of death as blunt force trauma. In 2021, he was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, but soon died behind bars. These details were depressing, yet the trivialities tormented her even more. The unsightly stain on the corridor carpet that never disappeared. The paper flyer slipped under the door that night, advertising a murder mystery trivia contest the next day. The realization that hundreds of people were sleeping peacefully, unaware of the real nightmare just meters away. Cruise company brochures depict azure expanses and happy family faces. They omit that the ocean is a confined arena where all of humanity's hidden vices come to light. Human weaknesses capable of distorting reality. 8 years have passed since that ill-fated trip, but she still flinches at sudden knocks on hotel room walls. The narrow corridor, like a ship's, flickers in her memory under the hum of fluorescent lights, along with the figure of a man in blood-soaked clothes, repeating the same phrase like a broken record. When friends start talking about booking a cruise, she politely smiles and changes the subject. The landscapes were undoubtedly captivating, but all that beauty pales when you realize how thin the bulkheads are on a ship and how quickly a serene vacation evening can turn into a crime scene from which there is no escape, even in the open sea. She booked a 7-day summer cruise, seeking the sound of waves, the warmth of the sun, and pleasant company after a grueling winter spent working within the 4 walls of her home. Arriving in Miami, she wheeled her compact suitcase along the gangway and allowed the crew to scan her key card. For the first time in many months, she tasted anonymity in its most beneficial form. Just one of thousands of travelers among the 3,000 souls on board. Her cabin, an interior single on the 9th deck, was compact and cozy with artificial portholes where the lighting gently transitioned from azure daylight to warm sunset tones. After unpacking, she put the key card on a lanyard and hurried to the buffet for the departure ceremony before the crowd thickened. At the salad bar, her gaze snagged on a man who was already boring into her with his eyes. He wore an unpretentious gray t-shirt, beige cargo pants, and a baseball cap without any identifying marks. He was around 40, maybe slightly younger, athletic build, with a neat, short beard. Nothing suspicious, except for that hypnotic stare as she filled her plate. When their eyes met, he smiled as if they were in on a shared secret. She moved 3 trays away, quickly finished her meal, and went out onto the open deck, where a flock of seagulls swirled in the ship's wake. An inner voice assured her, "There are hundreds of guests on board. Random eye contact is common. Seeing the same face a couple of times is nothing." In the evening, the cruise director hosted a welcome show in the theater, where purple spotlights pulsed to the music. A band played golden hits of the 70s, and she chose a seat in the middle of the hall. When the host urged everyone to get up and dance, she joined in, laughing side by side with neighboring strangers. Turning around, she noticed Gray T-shirt 2 rows behind. He was sitting alone, clapping out of sync, but his gaze was once again fixed on her. Her heart pounded. She quickly sank into her seat, while the crowd continued to twirl. After the show, she waited for him to leave the hall, exited through a side exit, and stayed close to groups on the promenade, making her way to her cabin. The second day opened with morning yoga at dawn on the upper deck, where the salty breeze ruffled the mats and the instructor's voice echoed from the speakers, instilling peace. In the third downward-facing dog pose, she glanced toward the railing. Gray T-shirt loomed at the edge of the area, arms crossed, the cap's visor pulled low, never taking his eyes off her. He didn't flinch as she transitioned to the next asana. A sudden, sharp cramp forced her to end the session early. Rolling up her mat, she went around the pool by a roundabout route and preferred the elevator to the stairs. She spent the morning in her cabin with the door locked and the lights off, listening to the rhythmic hum of the engines like a lullaby. By dinner, she was tired of hiding. Formal night called for elegance, and she put on a dark blue dress, sitting down at a table for 8. The conversation flowed easily about professions, hometowns, planned excursions. The tension began to melt away until the waiter served soup for the empty seat next to her, and Gray T-shirt lowered himself into it a moment later. He didn't greet anyone, didn't order anything, just mime sips from his spoon, his gaze sliding over faces. Reaching her, his lips twitched, either in apology or hidden triumph. Neighbors caught the atmosphere. One gentleman inquired, "An acquaintance?" She shook her head. Gray T-shirt rose and left without touching his food. Her appetite vanished. Back in her cabin, she stepped out onto the tiny private balcony for some fresh air. The summer night enveloped her in thick humidity. The ocean blackened, foaming only with white caps, and then she saw him again. He stood on the deck reserved exclusively for the crew, 1 floor below, leaning on the railing and looking straight up. This space was not adjacent to passenger cabins. A good 15 meters of emptiness separated them, but she rushed inside and latched the balcony door. With trembling hands, she headed to the guest services desk. The night supervisor patiently listened to her story. The same subject everywhere, no direct contact, but with unwavering surveillance. She described the outfit, height, beard, and cap in detail. He entered the data into a search of the manifest, frowned, tried different variations. Nothing. Perhaps a crew member off duty, he suggested, although the staff photos he showed did not match her description. He called security. 2 officers arrived promptly, maintaining a professional and courteous demeanor. They escorted her to the 9th deck, inspected the balcony door lock, and assured her they would check the camera footage. She expressed her gratitude, believing the nightmare was over. The 3rd day was marked by a flashing message on the cabin phone. Security invited her to the office. The chief officer greeted her with apologies. They had scoured all available camera angles in the locations she had indicated. Not a trace of anyone resembling Grey T-shirt in the footage from the buffet, theater, yoga area, dining room, or her corridor. In every episode where she remembered him, the cameras recorded only emptiness or random passengers. The officer gently inquired if she had mistaken faces. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but horror outweighed it. "I definitely saw him," she snapped. "He promised to increase patrols near her cabin." That evening, she tried to distract herself with a trivia contest. She participated in a trivia contest. Halfway through, her teammate nudged her gently so she could read the question. The woman looked up and saw him in the far corner of the lounge, where he leaned casually against a column, the visor of his cap obscuring his features. She quietly said the answer, pushed away from the table, and quickly headed for the exit. In the corridor behind her, footsteps sounded, leisurely but steadily approaching. She broke into a run, turned the corner to the nearest internal phone, and dialed the emergency security number. While the phone rang, the footsteps suddenly stopped. The woman looked back. The corridor was empty. Security methodically combed deck after deck, cabin after cabin, looking for the unregistered man. They didn't tell the passengers anything, but she noticed extra officers by the stairs, locked doors to storage compartments, and hushed conversations among the crew, full of anxiety. 2 days passed, filled with excursions to the islands. She only went ashore as part of organized groups, avoiding solo walks. Nevertheless, the feeling of his presence didn't leave her. Sometimes it was a reflection in a store window, sometimes a figure 3 rows behind on the tender, sometimes a silhouette behind a lifeboat on the return to the ship. Each time she pointed him out, and each time the checkers saw only someone else, nothing suspicious. On the last night, the liner put on a grand fireworks display from the bow deck. She stayed on her cabin balcony, believing that the crowd would reliably hide him. Among the hundreds of spectators, the sky burst into bright colors, scarlet, emerald, and gold. The roar of explosions echoed across the water. When the last sparks faded, darkness briefly enveloped the decks before the spotlights came on. In that fleeting black pause, she heard the balcony partition behind her click, softly, sliding open. The woman whirled around. The man in the gray T-shirt stepped through the narrow gap from the next cabin. The cap was off. His beard glistened with sweat, as if wet, and his eyes gleamed like water-worn stones. He put a finger to his lips, demanding silence. Instinct compelled her to freeze in silence, suppressing the paralyzing horror. She ducked under his outstretched arm, burst through the sliding door into the corridor, and screamed as she ran forward. Cabin doors swung open. Passengers peered out in bewilderment. 2 security officers rushed to her aid. Together, they returned to her cabin. The balcony door remained wide open, the partition slightly ajar. The neighboring cabin belonged to an elderly couple who moved only with the help of a cane and could hardly pose a threat. Not a single place to hide. They thoroughly searched the bathroom, closets, and under the bed. All empty. One of the officers sighed heavily. "I believe you," he said. But how do you arrest a shadow? She spent the rest of the night in an empty cot in the infirmary, locking herself in with a sturdy lock. At dawn, the ship docked in Miami. Security escorted her ashore first, past carefree families and unsuspecting port workers. At customs, she glanced up the gangway. The man in the gray t-shirt stood at the railing among the crowd of tourists, waving goodbye. The cap was back on his head, and his gaze was fixed solely on her. The moment her feet touched the terminal floor, he dissolved behind a wall of sunny passengers. She filed an official report, but subsequent letters from the company claimed that no such steward was found. No staff members were missing, and there was nothing unusual in the keycard logs. As compensation, they offered a credit for a future cruise. She refused. All summer, she followed the news, looking for stories of mysterious disappearances at sea. Nothing like it. Friends assured her that she had imagined it all, a figment of her nerves from the sea voyage. Perhaps that was the case. She works as a junior security officer on a mid-sized cruise liner, the Pacific Jewel. Her responsibilities are relatively simple: monitor surveillance cameras, flag any anomalies, and promptly inform senior staff. On the fourth night of the voyage, they threw a massive deck party by the pool. Loud music blared, neon bracelets were handed out, bright fruit cocktails were served, and over 800 passengers crowded around the illuminated water, creating a whirlwind of revelry. Even from the control room, she could feel the low bass vibrating through the metal floor. Around 11 p.m., the bartender radioed to report that a guest named Tyler Marsh had not returned for his tab, which he had started. His friend mentioned that Tyler was heavily intoxicated and lingering near the railings, so the crew feared he might have fallen overboard. It's a true night terror for any officer, and protocol dictates immediately initiating a roll call and stopping the ship. However, no one activates such a procedure without full certainty, as turning around a massive liner takes time and carries safety risks. She began reviewing camera archives to establish Tyler's last confirmed location. He appeared on tape at 10:42 p.m., dancing near the shallow end of the pool, shirtless, flip-flops dangling from 2 toes. At 10:48, he leaned against the starboard railing, a drink resting on the metal surface beside him. A brief shower from a passing cloud slightly blurred the lens, but the silhouette remained discernible. A friend called out, "Bro, you all right?" Tyler raised his glass. In a greeting gesture, that was the final clear shot. Tension mounted on the bridge like electricity in the air. The duty communications officer inquired, "Any badge swipe data? Every cabin door and most restricted passages record keycard activity." She pulled up the access logs. Tyler's cabin had last been opened at 8:17 p.m., but then something odd struck her. A swipe at 11:03 p.m. at the entrance to Engineering Deck 2, an area passengers are never allowed into, reserved exclusively for crew. Tyler's ID card had activated the heavy door leading to the waste processing corridor. It seemed absurd. Deck 2 was 4 levels below the pool. If Tyler had fallen overboard, he would be in the ocean, not descending into a locked service corridor 15 minutes later. The captain ordered the relevant video clip to be extracted from the camera. She opened the file. The screen filled with gray static, resembling interference on an old television without a signal. The timestamp matched exactly from 11:02 to 11:07. From 11:02 to 11:07, all other cameras were functioning without issue. Only this angle malfunctioned. As if deliberately obscuring the moment the door swung open. ship management decided to withhold the alarm signal about a passenger overboard. Instead, security officers Ortega and Bell headed to Deck 2 via elevator. The control room operator remained on the line, switching views as they advanced through the deserted steel passage. Pipes lined the sides, dotted with condensation droplets, creating a damp sensation. The atmosphere in the lower levels was invariably permeated by the aroma of diesel fuel and chlorine from disinfection. Reaching their destination, the officers stopped at the door. It was locked, but not bolted. Bell, wearing a protective glove, shouldered it open, and the rusty hinge emitted a drawn-out screech, allowing them to enter. The room was a cramped technical compartment with gray-paneled walls, a muted ceiling, and flickering fluorescent lights. Shards of glass glittered on the metal floor, apparently from a broken container, such as a bottle. Behind a row of waste compressors, Ortega discovered a crumpled beach towel with the ship's logo. He cautiously unfurled it with the toe of his boot, and dark, soaked stains appeared in the center of the fabric. His voice, heavy with realization, came over the radio. "It's blood." Bell methodically lit the corners with his flashlight. No sign of Tyler, but a service locker with clear signs of tampering lurked against the opposite wall. The keypad was shattered, bare wires dangling. Someone had clearly used force or a tool to break the security. 2 sets of crew uniforms and a pair of bolt cutters were missing. The officers stepped back and cordoned off the area. They now had a missing passenger, a bloodied towel, stolen equipment, and a defective video recording. The duty captain ordered a covert lockdown, sentries at all, gangways, but without public announcements, so as not to sow panic among the vacationers. The operator continued to delve into the data. Another activation of Tyler's card at 11:19 p.m., this time at a service elevator near the theater, closer to Deck 1, where cargo ramps yawned open to the ocean. She reactivated that camera. The screen flickered with interference for exactly 3 minutes. Either the card had been duplicated, or someone had used Tyler's original after his disappearance. And that individual likely knew how to disable cameras, ripping out cables or using an unknown jammer. In the cool air of the control room, the operator felt beads of sweat form on her upper lip. Midnight passed. The music by the pool on the main deck ceased. Visitors dispersed to their rooms, unaware of the drama unfolding in the depths. The crew in modest uniform combed every engineering nook. At 12:27, Ortega reported over the radio. Card found. It was lying on the floor in the port-side cargo hold near an open ventilation grill, spacious enough for an adult to squeeze through. The grill led to the ballast tanks, and from there to a hatch in the hull, just a meter above the waterline. There was a fresh gouge on the hatch latch, as if it had been forced open. The operator mentally reconstructed the scene. An assailant drags an intoxicated guest into the depths, uses his card for disguise, inflicts a wound or something worse, appropriates a crew uniform, and escapes into the night ocean via a Secret Service hatch. But what was the point of dragging the body away? Kidnapping? Staging an accident? The more closely she scrutinized the empty frames, the more mysterious the entire chain seemed. At exactly 1 a.m., the ship slowed, and the crew began scanning the wake with searchlights. The captain went on the air with a pacifying message about minor malfunctions, urging passengers not to leave their cabins. Searchlight beams traced dazzling arcs over the dark waves. Nothing stirred on the surface. The Coast Guard received the signal and would dispatch forces at dawn. Dawn painted the sky gray. The deck, which had been bustling with fun the day before, regained its usual appearance. Sailors were clearing deck chairs, washing away traces of spilled drinks. Guests whispered about the ship's stopover the night before, attributing it to drills. Only a narrow circle of insiders knew about the man's disappearance. Tyler Marsh was never found. Coast Guard cutters combed 50 square miles for 2 days. Divers inspected the hull. Not a single clue. Relatives flew home with his belongings, packed and sealed. The official protocol reads, "Suspected fall overboard while intoxicated." Back in the control room, the operator kept a couple of artifacts, a printout of the access log with those inexplicable activations, and a still frame from the camera by the pool at 10 Antremordio 8. When zoomed in, slightly to the right of Tyler's shoulder, a figure in dark clothing can be discerned, face obscured by a towel, lowering a metallic object into a backpack. This is not a guest. No identification bracelet, no glass in hand. He materializes in just one shot, and in the next, he dissolves as if he sensed the camera's aim. The operator convinces herself that there is a logical explanation. Perhaps a glitch in the card scanner and random interference.